Order. Before I turn to my opening statement about our hearing today, let me begin by noting that if we get a quorum of 7 members, we're going to take a moment to adopt a resolution appointing members of our subcommittee. Now today we will be discussing the steps needed to address cybersecurity threats to the United States energy infrastructure, in addition to energy resources that are being used as a geopolitical weapon against our friends and allies. Our adversaries have increasingly begun using cyber attacks to infiltrate American infrastructure, to disrupt our energy security and economy. The rapidly changing cyber threat landscape will require constant federal attention and strategic flexibility to ensure that we are ahead of the curve and not caught off guard to the detriment of our national security, public health and safety, and our economy. Our government has taken substantial steps in the past decade to improve federal coordinations, increasing funding for research and development, enhance intelligent dissemination, and build on existing public-private partnerships. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today to contribute to this important discussion and provide input on additional actions Congress needs to take to strengthen our energy cybersecurity strategy. Cyber threats can be attributed to individual bad actors, transnational organized crime, state-sponsored groups, and nations. The 2022 Annual Threat Assessment from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence assessed China as the broadest and most active cyber threat to the U.S. government and private sector networks. In addition, the assessment identifies Russia as the top cyber threat that is specifically focused on targeting our critical infrastructure. Russia's cyber attack that shut down Ukraine's electricity grid in 2015 was a wake-up call to the possibility of large-scale cyber attacks on critical infrastructure like our electric grid. Putin's vicious aggression in Ukraine increased the likelihood that Russia will increasingly rely on extreme and dangerous tactics against Ukraine's allies, such as using cyber attacks as retaliation for sending arms and aid to the Ukrainians. Domestically, our relevant agencies and industries have been on heightened alert. Cyber incidents impacting our domestic energy infrastructure pose a persistent threat, many of which we never even heard about. However, some threat attacks have highlighted the severity of attacks directed to our energy infrastructure. In 2021, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack forced a shutdown of the country's most important fuel pipeline for nearly a week. Colonial delivers nearly half of the gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel to the East Coast, over 100 million gallons per day. The Department of Energy provided a stark assessment. If the pipeline had been down for a few more days, it would have resulted in diesel rationing. Chemical and refinery operations would have been suspended due to an inability to transport their production. Just last year, the Department of Justice charged 4 Russian government officials who used cyber attacks to target critical infrastructure and companies from 2012 to 2018. They breached hundreds of energy companies worldwide, including a nuclear power plant in Kansas, intending to disrupt our global energy system. Moreover, there have been numerous reports of attempted cyber attacks on the U.S. electric grid and natural gas sites. Our energy system is rapidly evolving. Our aging grid is not designed to protect itself from modern cyber attacks and is transforming into a new network-connected environment. In addition to the electric grid, pipeline networks are becoming more dependent on internet-based control systems for their operations. As we improve our energy systems with remote and automated capabilities intended to make energy more reliable, this new connectivity raises the stakes for security intrusions. We must also consider the new distributed energy resources connected to our grid. Americans are purchasing rooftop solar panels and electric vehicles at a rapid rate. These resources provide benefits to consumers, but present serious cybersecurity challenges to our grid. While experts are still determining the degree of risk, there is concern that these new resources can serve as additional entry points for cyber adversaries to target the grid and could have the possibility to cause major disruptions. As cyber attacks on our energy system have increased, our nation's national and energy security relies on steadfast commitment from our federal agencies and private partners. DOE is the sector risk management agency for energy sector. This means DOE has the responsibility to coordinate information sharing and response operations, technology development and deployment, and other energy cybersecurity responsibilities across the federal government. In that role, DOE works closely with FERC and NERC which have jurisdiction over cybersecurity standards for electric generators and transmission, and the TSA, which has jurisdiction over pipeline cybersecurity. Yesterday, Senator Risch and I introduced the ETAC, that's ETAC, Establishment Act, which establishes the Energy Treaty Analysis Center for DOE. ETAC will serve as the energy sector's centralized hub in the federal government for cyber information sharing and threat response, and DOE will be able to better defend the U.S. energy sector against cyber threats and inform the industry of actionable steps that they can take with their threat response. The creation of this center is critical to the energy security of our nation, and I look forward to hearing from DOE about their work on it. A cybersecurity incident has the ability to cripple our economy, and we must pay attention. We took action last Congress by providing $1.9 billion in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to shore up cybersecurity across the transportation, energy, and water sectors by supporting utilities and state and local governments. I am immensely proud of this work. In addition, the CHIPS and Science Bill authorized $14.7 billion in funding for our national labs, which led our nation with their expertise in advancing the research and development of the cybersecurity capabilities. But more can be done. As chair of the committee and the Senate Armed Services Cybersecurity Subcommittee, I'm very invested in the security of our energy infrastructure. We have gathered before us a group of experts in this field who I know can provide us with recommendations that we can turn into concrete bipartisan legislative action. Cybersecurity and energy security impacts all of us and all of our constituents. We can and we must continue to take steps to empower our agencies and industries to effectively respond to these threats. With that, I turn over to Senator Brasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the comments you made. I want to thank you for holding the hearing today. The reliability and resilience of the electric grid of our nation's pipeline network are critical to our national security. From healthcare to finance and to manufacturing, transportation, these sectors rely heavily on a steady supply of energy to help keep our nation going. Nearly 2 years ago, the ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline offered a disturbing example of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities of our nation's critical energy infrastructure. It forced a temporary shutdown of a pipeline network that supplies almost half of the gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel to the eastern part of the United States. As China and Russia have grown more aggressive on the world stage, so too have their tactics in cyberspace. The opening weeks of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russia counter-connected hackers attempted to take almost a dozen American power plants and natural gas sites offline. Mr. Lee, who's testifying before us today, described the malicious software they used as a wartime capability. Russian cyber attacks are an immediate threat to the American energy sector. It is the Chinese government, though, that poses the greatest long-term cyber threat to America's critical energy infrastructure. China has been targeting American pipeline control systems for more than a decade. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security believe these hackers are attempting to establish control over American pipelines to use in future China-backed operations. The director of the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency warned us just a few weeks ago about China. She said that in the case of an invasion of Taiwan, China would likely launch cyber attacks against America's critical energy infrastructure. She stated, the big threat we all need to care about is China. Now, the Biden administration has prioritized, wrongly so, prioritized greening of the grid over the reliability of energy production and delivery. This is a dangerous mistake. It dramatically increases the risk to our national security. From solar panels to electric vehicles, this administration is forcing the rapid adoption of technology that is inherently more vulnerable to cyber attacks and exploitation. According to leading cybersecurity experts, electric vehicles offer orders of magnitude more targets for cyber attacks than standard internal combustion engines. Orders of magnitude greater risk. Remarkably, the Secretary of Energy chose to downgrade the leadership of the Department's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. This is at the very time that her own department is pushing the adoption of technologies that pose and increased cybersecurity risk. Soon after Secretary Granholm was sworn in, I, along with a bipartisan members of this committee of senators, wrote her to urge the department to assign an assistant secretary to lead the department's Office of Cybersecurity. We explained the role of the office would be diminished if a Senate-confirmed official did not lead it. She took no action. 2 months later, the Colonial Pipeline was hacked and forced to shut down. To revitalize the Department of Energy's Cybersecurity Office, Senators Risch and Collins and Crapo and I introduced a bill this week to ensure that an assistant secretary will lead the department's cybersecurity office. Restoring the office to its prior standing is an obvious first step. But more needs to be done. The federal government must get its cyber house in order. We must do more to counter China and Russia. We must work to strengthen private-public partnerships to improve the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure, and we must not weaken our security in a headlong rush to electrify everything. I want to thank the witnesses for all joining us today. I look forward to their testimony and to answering to our questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. And I'd like to turn to our witnesses now. We'll begin with Mr. Kumar, then we'll be followed by Mr. Lee, and then Mr. Swick. I want to thank you all again for joining us today, and we'll be started with Mr. Kumar.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the Department of Energy on our efforts to secure the nation's critical energy infrastructure. I appreciate the committee's ongoing partnership on this critical issue. It is undeniable cyber risks to energy systems are increasing, both from nation states such as China and Russia, and from criminal actors. For the past 4 years running, each annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community has pointed to persistent and malicious cyber threats facing U.S. infrastructure. These reports are clear. The cyber actors targeting U.S. energy infrastructure are a threat to national security. Simultaneously, the energy sector is becoming steadily more digitally connected and interconnected. This interconnectedness increases the grid's flexibility and ability to recover after disruptions, making it stronger and more resilient. However, as our digital footprint increases, there are inherently more access points for cyber adversaries to exploit. DOE is uniquely positioned to address malicious cyber threats facing the U.S. energy sector, and we are doing so in 3 significant ways. 1, by enhancing cyber threat collaboration with the private sector. 2, by strengthening the cybersecurity of hardware and software used in the sector. And 3, by embracing the philosophy of security by design when designing the energy systems of the future. Today, I'm pleased to provide a brief overview of these activities, starting with one of CSER's newer efforts to strengthen the cybersecurity of the energy sector. The recently released National Cybersecurity Strategy raised the bar for public-private collaboration and specifically named DOE's pilot of the Energy Threat Analysis Center, or ETAC, as an example of the new and innovative capabilities that the nation needs to effectively collaborate at the scale and speed required to defend critical infrastructure from cyber threats. The ETAC pilot brings experts from government and industry, intel and non-intel, to jointly analyze and address cyber threats to the energy sector. The goal is to establish a collective defense posture by connecting dots between what industry is seeing on private sector networks to what we are seeing through government channels to get a true picture of the cyber threats and then be able to get timely and actionable information out to owners and operators across the country in an expeditious manner. We plan on leveraging the incredible capabilities at the national laboratories, subject matter expertise from electricity, oil, and natural gas companies, manufacturers, and cyber technology companies to come together in a unified front under the ETAC pilot. On supply chain security, it is imperative that hardware and software is secure before it is deployed in the sector. To that end, we're partnering with global manufacturers such as GE, Schweitzer, and Schneider to secure their systems through testing and innovation. These partnerships have resulted in the discovery of vulnerabilities in critical grid equipment that we've been able to address before they're exploited by cyber actors. Finally, recognizing that it is far more efficient and cost-effective to build in cybersecurity measures as technologies are designed than it is to bolt them on once the technology is in the field. CSER is leading the charge to realize security by design in the energy sector. We're doing this in two fundamental ways. One, we're partnering with states and industry to develop cybersecurity baselines for distribution systems and distributed energy resources. And two, we're investing in research and development to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover from cyber intrusions. The R&D efforts are threat-informed, so that we're building cybersecurity solutions not only for the threats of today, but also the threats of tomorrow. These solutions rely on strong partnerships with our industry colleagues, some of individual from AEP on the panel today, national laboratories, academia, and other private sector companies. Energy security is critical to our national security, and CSER is committed to ensuring that the U.S. energy sector is secure and resilient for Americans today and for generations to come. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go to Mr. Lee.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I am Robert Lee, the CEO and co-founder of Dragos, a leading industrial cybersecurity technology provider. 5 years ago, I testified before this committee about the industrial cybersecurity threat landscape, focusing specifically on the operational technology, or what we call OT, and those industrial control systems. These are the specialized computers and networks that interact with the physical environment, such as a control system that opens up a circuit breaker on an electric substation or a gas turbine control system that generates electricity. They are what makes critical infrastructure critical. Despite decades of focus on infrastructure cybersecurity, the industrial portion of that had largely been ignored and underinvested in. At the time, I noted there were only 5 state actor cyber groups that were explicitly targeting industrial networks. Now, Dragos tracks over 20 such groups, including those that have targeted human life directly. Today, my message has more urgency. My testimony this morning focuses on what has changed over the last 5 years and the actions we must take to protect our national security and our local communities. I will present 3 key points that are relevant to this hearing's focus. My first point is that the industrial threat landscape has shifted irreversibly this past year. Prior to 2018, the heterogeneous nature of our industrial infrastructure made it difficult for adversaries to create repeatable attacks that cause disruption or physical damage. For good reason, industry has moved towards homogeneous infrastructure with common software packages, network protocols, facility designs, training, and so forth. I warned that one day an adversary would take advantage of this, though, and it would be a massive shift for the industry. In 2022, that adversary emerged. Dragos was contacted by an undisclosed third party that had identified a new collection of malware, and our experts analyzed this capability and, with permission, partnered closely with the United States government agencies. We coined this capability Pipe Dream. Pipe Dream was developed by a highly capable strategic state adversary and is the first reusable cross-industry capability that can achieve disruptive or destructive effects on domestic industrial equipment. Based on Dragos' assessment, Pipe Dream initially targeted energy assets, but can work in almost all operational environments, including military weapon systems. Pipe Dream cannot just simply be patched away. Once it's in a network, it's a reliable tool for attack, making detection and response of those capabilities as important as prevention. There is a victory here as well, though. Dragos worked very closely with the National Security Agency, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and Department of Energy to further analyze and report on Pipe Dream out to the broader infrastructure community prior to it being employed. This makes it one of the most significant public-private partnership wins of all time in cybersecurity, in my opinion. For my second point, I turn to how the government can be more effective in countering strategic national threats by seeking to understand and prioritize what is working and stop spending effort on things that are not. Few examples. Government labs are still resourced to create their own cybersecurity technologies, most of which are duplicative with existing commercial technologies. I struggle to name one tech from labs over the last 20 years in cybersecurity that is commercially viable or still used across the industry today. Yet, these same labs and the Department of Energy have an amazing set of talent and do a great job on strategic efforts like cyber-informed engineering. That is, of course, to rethink how we design the energy system of the future to engineer out some of the cyber risk. I recommend refocusing national lab programs to utilize their amazing talent on similar longer-term strategic initiatives. Industry also needs, as another example, harmonized messaging from government agencies. A typical power company receives guidance and priorities from the DHS, the DOE, FBI field offices, DOD, all their bases in the various service territory, state regulators, state officials, federal regulators, and federal officials. These priorities identified by all the different agencies often differ, causing analysis paralysis in the security teams, leaving many companies not knowing exactly what the government would like them to do. Regulations also overlap in intent, but are often not aligned with each other. We need to regulate towards outcomes, not prescriptive requirements, using the expertise of the private sector, and be sure they're not counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish, such as overlapping reporting requirements that cause confusion. Ultimately, the federal government should eliminate duplicative or unnecessary projects and redirect supports and efforts such as cyber-informed engineering and the Energy Threat Analysis Center. The third point is that government must identify what's critical, especially with the risk scenarios and resources that are required. As an example, the government must be resourced appropriately to protect its own networks. DOE and CISA both require authorities and resourcing to hold the DOE and government agencies accountable for cybersecurity requirements on new projects, such as distributed energy resources. It is difficult for the government to talk credibly on the topic of cybersecurity when its institutions sometimes have less security than most energy sites. So in conclusion, leadership is necessary on actual priorities and requirements. Pipe dream has changed the game, and ultimately the government does have an important role and responsibility to play. I sincerely thank the committee for providing me the opportunity to testify today and welcome any questions or requests for additional information.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Swick.
Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, members of the committee, and fellow panelists. My name is Steve Swick. I'm the Chief Security Officer of American Electric Power, where I am responsible for both physical and cybersecurity. I have led AEP cybersecurity for over 25 years. Prior to my time at AEP, I served in the U.S. Air Force and helped establish initial cyber response capabilities in the U.S. with the Air Force Computer Emergency Response Team, which was prior to the creation of Cyber Command. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today about threats facing U.S. critical infrastructure, and in particular, the electric power industry. Today's cyber threats are complex and dynamic, requiring flexibility, creativity, and collaboration to address. At AEP, we firmly believe that resilience begins with security, and security is resilience. Offensive cyber tools and services are now widely accessible to bad actors of all types, from low-level criminals to nation-states. The recently released Office of Director of National Intelligence Annual Threat Assessment asserts that nation-states are developing offensive cyber capabilities for the purpose of impacting critical infrastructure, including the electric power industry. To best protect the electric grid, we must proactively identify threats, coordinate a collective strategy to shield against them, and share relevant intelligence and mitigations to strengthen our defenses. AEP participates in forums and collaborates with groups and governmental entities, including the CEO-led Electric Sector Coordinating Council and the Public-Private Cybersecurity Risk Information Sharing Program. We work closely with the Energy Information Sharing and Analysis Center and the Department of Energy Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, or CSER, offices, which allow us to benefit from DOE's expertise. AEP also maintains close ties with state governments in our service territory, which allows us to ensure timely and accurate data sharing. Security standards play an important role in defending against bad actors. However, these standards should be flexible and practical in their application to support alignment across the industry. Overly prescriptive regulations can hamper our ability to quickly respond to new threats and often make achieving the intended security objective a challenge. To prepare for and defend for the future, we will need improved vendor integrity and product security, encouraging vendors to focus on security by design and being first to security rather than first to market. Enables members of the sector, regardless of size, to have a reasonable level of confidence in their security investments. We also need to encourage more mature cyber hygiene and adoption of secure products. Incentivizing utilities to adopt a robust, holistic, and long-term cyber resilience program through the recent FERC Notice of Proposed Rulemaking is an important step towards a more secure electric grid. Speed of sharing is also a key priority to improve speed of collective action in cyberspace. Collaboration spaces like DOE's Energy Threat Analysis Center offer a potential way to deepen our public-private partnership and reduce time to share. For utilities like AEP that provide services in several states, competing and at times conflicting requirements can increase burden of sharing information and slow progress. As the National Cybersecurity Strategy highlights, harmonizing regulations is a key priority of which AEP is very supportive. We hope this is the start of an ongoing dialogue, and I thank you for the opportunity to address you on these issues. I would be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Now we're going to start with the questions. I begin with with mine. The energy cybersecurity threat environment, this is for all the panelists, you can think about this, is rapidly evolving, requiring constant adjustments to protect us. The proliferation of network-connected equipment and the improper stewardship of sensitive data can lead to enormous consequences, as we found with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack and other attacks. It is increasingly clear that the state and non-state actors are targeting our energy infrastructure to disrupt our economy and for financial gain. We have various vulnerabilities. I want to get the panel's perspective on the current cyber threat environment. In a nutshell, to simplify this, we have much more critical in different areas where it's going to be colonial and other areas such as that. We're very critical. If I was going to create a cyber attack, I would hit the most critical to have the most impact, to send the greatest message. So are we hardening those first? Have we picked our priorities? Do you all know of anything that's being done, or would you suggest something that should be done? Yeah, we can start right and go down the line very quickly if you can.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. You've raised a really important piece of this. When I think of what keeps me up at night in terms of the various cyber threats, it really does, there are three big buckets that I think about. One is, like you said, there's increasing cyber threats. The intel community keeps telling us China, Russia, and then with Colonial, it was a criminal actor that was able to disrupt. So if a criminal actor is able to disrupt that, imagine the capabilities of a nation state to conduct a similar incident. Number two, it's the digitization. The reality is the grid and the energy sector more broadly is becoming more digitally connected. And that is good because it helps us become more reliable, more resilient as a country. It lets us connect different generation sources from across the country. But we also have an opportunity to build in security. And so that is another area that as we become more digitally connected as a society, we need to be including cybersecurity. And then three, we need to look at our workforce. The reality is across the country, we have a shortage of about 700,000 cybersecurity professionals across critical infrastructure in the United States. Now, if you just think about energy, it's folks who know energy and cyber.
What are we doing to educate or recruit?
We need to do both of those, sir.
Are we doing it?
We have programs involved to work on exactly that of our current workforce, our future workforce. Both pieces need to be addressed.
Very quickly, because I only have so much time. Let me ask this to all of you to make sure you tell me. Have we prioritized, do you know of any group such as yourself that are working to prioritize the most critical infrastructure we have in all segments of our society?
Sir, we at the department, that's one of our roles as the sector risk management agency.
How far along are you?
We have an electric sector risk register.
Could you share that with our committee? I know that Senator Brasso and all of us would be really, really interested in seeing what you have identified as critical and what we've done to date.
So we're happy to brief you on
Mr.
that.
Lee.
I would briefly state that I'm very excited about the DOE's work, but I don't think we have those critical lists. I think there's a lot of overlapping lists, and some of the most critical sites in the country are based on use cases. You want to put troops in the South China Sea in a conflict, it's not going to be the largest sites that are important. It might be a tiny substation supporting a port, and nowhere in the government am I aware that that's identified.
Are you all doing that yourself? Are you evaluating it?
Not from a Dragos perspective, but it is something that I've testified before that the government should absolutely look at.
Why are you not?
We're working with the sector to do that, sir, and we're happy to brief you on that.
Well, we're going to bring up all of you. Mr. Swick, real quick.
So as a major asset owner, I know myself as AEP is prioritizing all the critical assets. We have a tiering methodology.
How well are you connected with the government trying to give you basically advice or basically recommendations or alerting you to any type of challenges you may have?
Regular at classified and unclassified level discussions on what we think is most critical and where we should focus and all that. And that includes my peers, larger peers.
Are you working on hardening your most critical substations, infrastructure, everything?
Absolutely. That has been underway for a long time, and we continue to look and reevaluate as new threats evolve and new things change.
Okay, real quick on this. Given your roles at Caesar, and this is for Mr. Kumar very quickly, important transformers are for maintaining electric reliability, especially when recovering from malicious attacks on equipment and natural disasters. The lead times for new distribution transformers are as long as 3 years when these products were available within 8 to 12 weeks just a few years ago. I don't know what the hell happened to the production line. Anyway, what concrete action is DOE taking to address the transformer shortages?
Sure, that's a really important issue. Last year, we partnered with the electricity sector owners and operators to identify what was the cause of specific supply challenges that we were having across the country. We also—
What'd you find out?
There were two big items that we learned. One was labor. A lot of the transformer manufacturers didn't have the labor to actually produce some of the transformers. The second thing was minerals. And then the third thing that was a contributing factor was, as we become more electrified as a community, it was putting a demand on increasing more of the production.
Well, let me ask you this. Basically, that you all are seeing it firsthand of what happens if we don't have the critical mineral supply or a reliable foreign supply chain. Then why don't you push harder for us to get permitting done to where basically we can secure our own? If DOE would speak up, it might help us.
Mr. Chairman, we couldn't agree more that permitting is an issue that we do need to address. It would help connect sources of generation and potentially help alleviate some of this
Please
issue.
speak up. I've been talking to Senator Granholm, and we need you all's voice involved in this very much. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to pursue this. Mr. Lee, President Biden's senior advisor for clean energy innovation and implementation, John Podesta, he stated just a few weeks ago that domestic manufacturing for clean energy technologies is going to depend on, in his words, China-dominated supply chains. That's what the White House is saying. They're going to depend on China-dominated supply chains. Do you believe that a reliance on China for critical components of clean energy technology presents, say, an increased cybersecurity risk to the grid and to American families?
Yes, so absolutely. And beyond the cybersecurity risk, even depending on them for what we need for critical national security use cases, even if they were trying to help us, outsourcing that to another country is probably not the best idea.
So, Mr. Coomer, what do you think? I mean, this is the administration.
So thank you, Senator, for the question. Your identification of the threats from China are very real, and we need to take those threats seriously. So what we need to be doing is really need to be thinking about what requirements do we need to put on manufacturers from China versus domestic manufacturing. The reality is we do need to go ahead and push on domestic manufacturing to ensure that we have more secure, resilient supply chains, both from a security perspective, but to the chairman's question, both from an availability perspective. We need to be able to produce these things domestically. Now, if they are being acquired from nations like China, we might need to think about additional requirements for security before we install them here in the United States.
Well, I wish you would take that message back to the White House. Mr. Lee, so here's a Wall Street Journal, cybersecurity. Could electric vehicles be hacked? And the picture inside shows a guy sitting in looking in his rearview mirror and seeing the spy sitting in the back seat. Mr. Chairman, there's a spy sitting in the back seat there. How EVs might be hacked, right there.
Do we know that person?
Well, we don't, but, it could be looking from this situation of what we're looking at and who's coming after us. We know likely where the sources of these are. So the Wall Street Journal, can electric vehicles be hacked? Subheading answers the question. Yes, there are all sorts of potential potential doors in EVs for hackers to take advantage of. So cybersecurity expert Jim Gwynn goes on to say some of the EV charging networks are very insecure because they weren't designed with security in mind. So do you believe that EVs and the EV charging network increases the cyber risk for consumers in the grid?
Yes, absolutely. When we look at any of these lower cost assets, to include distributed energy resources, it is very common for the priority to be, as was stated by Mr. Swick, first to market, no security built in. The cheaper the asset, usually the less security you have.
So Director Coomer, how's your office working with the rest of the department to ensure that the consumers are protected from this expanded cyber risk that has been pointed out in the paper, and this to Mr. Lee's comments about first to market, cheapest to be produced, highest risk?
Senator Barrasso, thank you for that question. We really do think we need to think about it across a couple of different ways. The first one is we need to think about what are the policies we need to be thinking about, what are the cyber baselines that we need to ensure DERs, EV stations, EV providers need to be considering. So that is an effort we have underway currently to develop those baselines for things like EV manufacturing. The second thing we're doing is we're leveraging the capabilities of our partnerships with industry, so the EV manufacturers themselves and the national laboratory. So we have an effort underway to conduct cyber testing of some of the charging stations out there so we can produce better security for some of these charging stations going forward. And then most recently, a couple of months ago, the White House convened a meeting with EV manufacturers to talk about the classified threats of some of these threats that are heading towards us and what we can collectively do to buy down those threats, sir.
So then, Mr. Swick, it's abundantly clear long-term integrity and cybersecurity of our critical energy infrastructure is going to depend on effective public-private partnerships. In your view, what could the federal government be doing better in its efforts to work with the private sector to establish greater cybersecurity for the critical infrastructure that we need to protect?
So AEP is very passionate about that public-private partnership, invests heavily. The efforts like ETAC that is being proposed right now is valuable because it gives access to the utilities themselves to high-side data, collaboration with intelligence sources directly versus some briefings that many of us attend. So I think that is a good step. The other piece to that is more clearances to make sure everybody can attend those. AEP will get there, but not everybody has the level of clearances potentially needed to get to those discussions that may be valuable. So continuing to push on that is very important. And then standardization of regulation across will very much help.
And then finally, to Director Kumar, previous administration, your role was filled by a Senate-confirmed office head working through the interagency process. Would it be helpful if the Department of Energy's cyber office had that same senior standing to signify how important it is of the threats that were coming out and the efforts to address that?
Senator, thank you for your continued support of the office. I'm proud to lead the Office of Cybersecurity. And it's an incredible mission that I'm lucky to lead from security and resilience from an all hazards perspective, as you know, sir. This is the mission that brought me back from the private sector to come back and lead this. It was too important to not do it. I'll defer to the President and Congress on the title of the position, but I can confidently tell you that I have access to the department's resources and leaders to accomplish this mission.
Mr. Lee, do you have an opinion on that?
I do. Director Kumar is fantastic. I've known him for years, and I'm surprised the position wasn't elevated. It absolutely has caused him to be sidelined in some meetings. And titles matter in government, whether we like it or not.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. This is a great conversation, and so appreciate it. Let me say this. I agree. This position needs to be elevated. This should have been done a long time ago, under previous administrations. I just have to say this is a conversation that we keep having over and over and over again. It is time to do something on so many levels. And let me just bring you back here because when I was Attorney General of the state, I created the Technological Crimes Division to address all these issues. At that time, we were talking about the need to secure by design products. It is so ridiculous that we take all these off the shelf and then try to superimpose some cybersecurity on it. Now we're going into the 21st century with this new technology, and we're not forcing this secure by design because now it still is first to the market. It's a crazy conversation, but we've been having it for the last 20 years. So I'm so frustrated, as you can tell, with this conversation that we repeat over and over, and it's time we do something about it. We have to elevate this discussion. We have to make sure we make it a priority at the federal level. The states want it. I wanted it when I was working in the state. We all need to be collaborating for the very reasons that you are all talking about. Now, let me just take it to one specific area that I'm concerned because we have oversight over this, which is the electrical grid. The transformers conversation is not new. It is something, again, there's not only books written about it, but it is an issue that we keep talking about. I know this, you all know this. We have transformers in this country. Let's just take the high voltage transformers. Now, they make up less than 3% of U.S. transformers, but they carry 60 to 70% of the nation's electricity. And there has been widespread agreement among government agencies, utilities, manufacturers, that HV transformers in the U.S. are vulnerable to a terrorist attack and are natural disaster, and that such an attack potentially could have catastrophic consequences. Why? Because these transformers are extremely large and complex grid equipment, which typically takes 18 to 24 months to develop and install. This is not new. This is something we've known. And so my question, I guess, for all of you, and let me start with you, Mr. Kumar, is what else should we be doing here? You identified in response to the chairman's question to you about this partnership with the private sector. It is not new, this issue. You identified a labor issue. Yeah, it's there. What are we doing about it?
Senator, thank you for the question. We, as a result of some of the conversations we've been having on the availability of some of this equipment, first and foremost, we recognize that things like domestic manufacturing are something that we need to really be focused on as a government.
Yeah, I know that we need to focus on it, but what are we doing about it? What do you need to tell us that can help your department figure out how we partner with the private sector, because the private sector is key to all of this, and address this very issue that we have been talking about for years now? What do you need from us?
I appreciate you asking that. I think we're thinking of this problem as both a short-term problem and a medium and long-term problem. So domestic manufacturing is not going to address the short-term issues. It's going to address the medium and long-term issues. Short-term, one of the things we have been talking about is allocating funds for the Defense Production Act to actually start to incentivize building transformers here in the United States. That is a short-term solution. The other solutions we're working with the utilities and manufacturers on are thinking through apprenticeship programs to bring people into the trade of building transformers. So we've actually connected the Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce with manufacturers, and we're going to be actioning some of that effort going forward. Another area where we're going to be focusing on is standardization. So how do we reduce the production times to develop some of these big pieces of equipment, as you rightfully noted? They take, in some cases, 18 months plus for large power transformers. How do we increase the speed of the production of some of those transformers? So standardization is another piece that we're going to be looking at. And finally, my colleagues in the Office of Electricity are focused on how do we make transformers more modular? How do we make the production and movement of these big pieces of equipment through innovation and R&D? How do we make it easier to build some of these things going forward? So we need to be looking at all of those areas that you rightfully noted, ma'am.
Thank you, and I only have so much time left. Any other panelists want to comment on this as well?
I would just briefly state that the electric utilities have done an amazing job, and they're highly regulated already. Put more requirements on the vendors. As a vendor, my software is deployed in nuclear power plants and rail providers and things like that, and we made the extremely costly choice to put 100% of our software developers as U.S. citizens in the U.S. Why do I have that choice as a vendor servicing national security requirements?
Thank you. Anything else?
I'd just add that the supply chain diversity in vendors is really one of the ways we're looking at to help manage the risk. We do realize it. We have sharing agreements where we can share transformers across and focus on the managing of the supply as well as the cyber risk. So,
thank you. Thank you. Very helpful. Appreciate it.
We have to put the whammy on. Thank you. Now we have Senator Hawley. Early Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Early bird gets to worm. Mr. Kumar, let me start with you. We've talked about software targeting American networks. I want to ask you about hardware in some of these systems, particularly transformers. As some of the components for transformers, of course, are produced in China, and the risk of malicious hardware implants was sufficiently high that the last administration seized some Chinese transformers back in 2020.
Senator Hawley?
Yeah.
Could I interrupt you for just a second? Because we have 7 and we have to have some business that we can get done. And we'll come right back to you, okay? Now that a quorum of transacting business is present, we will recess for the hearing for a moment to approve the subcommittee assignments for the 118th Congress. A committee resolution appointing members to the subcommittees was circulated along with a notice and agenda for today's business meeting to all members last Friday. The chairs and ranking members were chosen in accordance with the rules of our respective party conferences, and member assignments reflects members' preferences. Do you wish to add anything to the subcommittee, Mr. Senator Barrasso, my friend?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to voice my support for the resolution appointing members of the subcommittees for the 118th Congress. I'd also like to congratulate Subcommittee Chairs Sanders, King, Cortez Masto, and Wyden, and Subcommittee Ranking Members Hawley, Daines, Lee, and Risch, and a note that Senator Hawley is serving as the ranking member of one of the subcommittees for the first time. I want to thank all of the members for their willingness to serve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to be heard on the subcommittee assignments?
Mr. Chairman, you went so fast, sir, I wasn't able to hear everything you said. So could you do the whole thing again? Really slow so that you could hear every word distinctly and clearly and
Sir,
think about each and
my fellow
every...
senator from North Dakota, I'll go backwards if you want me to.
Not necessary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If not, the question on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The resolution is agreed to. Concludes the business meeting. We'll go now resume our hearing and back to Senator Hawley. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, there we go. Just waiting for my time to be reset. All right, Mr. Kumar, back to you. We were talking about transformers, and I was about to ask you if you know what percentage of the U.S. electric grid contains components that are manufactured in China.
You're getting that data.
Senator Hawley, thank you for the question, and appreciate your recognition that we really need to be focused on the China threat when it comes to the grid equipment, both hardware and software that is deployed across the United States. Where we have been really focused on is 4 different areas here. One is we need to understand what are those critical components that, if disrupted, could have a debilitating impact on the United States. The second area where we're focused on is establishing provenance. So really understanding what's in this equipment, what's in the subcomponent level, and what pieces are potentially from an adversarial nation like a China. The second area where a third area where we're focused is testing. So we're testing some of this equipment down to the chip level and down to the software level in partnership with the DOE National Laboratories. And then finally, we're getting education and awareness out to the sector. That's where our focus of our effort is right now, and we're doing some of that analysis currently, and we're happy to brief you on some of that work.
So does that mean you don't know? You don't know what percentage of the grid contains components manufactured in China?
So, sir, there's a number of components that are built. The hard part about some of these questions is, you know, at the top level, it could be, it looks like an American manufacturer or a friendly country.
That's why I'm asking
The reality is, when you go down to the subcomponent level, is where it gets a lot harder. So our focus is really looking at all of that equipment, and we're now doing that analysis right now to see what pieces of equipment have some of these concerning areas. Now, the
Okay, wait. So I'm sorry, my time is limited here, but I just want, so you don't, it sounds like you don't know. When do you think you might know? You say you're doing the analysis. When will it be done, and when will we find out?
Sir, we are doing a broad analysis on what are the critical components in the sector, and what do we need to be prioritizing when it comes to some of our testing. And we're taking a risk-based approach. The reality is...
When will you know? When will you know what you... So, I didn't think this would be very hard. I asked you what percentage of the grid contains components manufactured in China. You don't know, but you say you're looking at it. I just want to know when you're going to be done. When are we going to know?
So, sir, it's a complex question. As you know, the grid is it has thousands of hardware and software.
I'm looking for a date. You're exhausting my patience now. When are you going to be done with the analysis?
Sure, I think the one thing we have to remember is when you have an analysis like this, China may not just choose to exploit equipment they're developing. They may choose to exploit equipment that is developed by someone else if it has a vulnerability.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm on the Senate floor. This is like a filibuster. Okay, I'll give this to you for the record. Let me try something else. What percentage of large power transformers are manufactured in China? Do you know that?
So currently, that number is not as high. We're doing it in
well, wait a minute. You just told me a second ago you don't have any idea what the number is. So when you say it's not as high, what are we even talking about here?
So the United States is not purchasing as many large power transformers as it was back in the day.
Back in the day? What does that even mean?
So what I find is a lot of the utilities themselves recognize the China risk, and they themselves are not purchasing these large power transformers.
Well, what percentage are manufactured in China of our large power transformers? Do you know? It's fine if you don't know. I'm just trying to get answers here. You just say, I don't know, and then I'm going to ask you when you're going to know.
I'm happy to get back with you on that answer, sir.
Okay. Okay, I find this really quite baffling. This leads me to ask why it is that this administration suspended the last administration's executive order that restricted the procurement of foreign electric equipment. That was Executive Order 13920. Why did they? I mean, why allow procurement of foreign electric equipment that can be so dangerous to the grid? Do you know why this happened?
So, sir, right now what the focus is, we have to take a holistic view of supply chain security. Just having an approved and unapproved list is not the only way to secure our supply chains.
Well, but that may be true. I'm just wondering that why would we allow China, a country that's suspected of numerous cyber attacks against us, supply major components for our electrical grid? I mean, is that a smart thing to do?
So, again, what we're taking is a more strategic approach to this, to look at all of those different pieces I just mentioned, to ensure we look at security from all different aspects, including security by design, is a key component of how we need to tackle this problem. It's too large of a problem to start to have one solution, which was the solution in that executive order. Now, that executive order is under review. I defer to the White House in terms of a replacement executive order, but know that this is an area that's a priority for us at the department to ensure the supply chain is secure, and we're doing that very actively.
Well, all right, my time's expired, and there's lots of my colleagues who want to ask questions. I'm going to give these questions to you again for the record. I'd like to know what percentage of the grid contains components manufactured in China. And if you don't know, that's fine. I'd like to know when you're going to have your analysis done. I'd like to know what percentage of large power transformers are manufactured in China. And I just humbly submit to you that allowing China, getting procurement of electric equipment made in China and allowing it to be integrated into our grid is a bad idea. And I'm baffled as to why this administration is allowing it to go forward. I'll probably have some more questions for you for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And Mr. Kumar, I think it's fair to say that we would all like to see what our dependency is on China's supply chain, because we're trying to break that immediately, if not quicker. Thank you. With that, we have now Senator Hickenlooper.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Ranking Member. Thank all of you for taking the time and being with us. Let me start with Mr. Lee. I was intrigued by your suggestion of how we could help infrastructure asset owners and operators. You suggested that the U.S. government might clarify cyber roles and responsibilities in the energy sector, identify requirements, and identify realistic threat scenarios. To what degree is some of that already happening, and what needs to be to occur to accelerate that and actually realize the goal?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. There's a lot of collaboration that happens, but the short answer is a lot of times the requirements are be cyber secure against cyber risks, and that's just not actionable to anybody. So it'd be much more effective if the government clarified what does it want out of a pipeline, or what does it want an electric grid operator to do, and against what scenarios. Are we concerned with a Chinese-based threat scenario that we've seen before? Let's clarify that and have them focus on that. And most importantly, I think it's important for the government to advise on why they care, what they want the outcome to be, but not tell the asset owners how to do it. There's so much expertise at these electric companies, they'll figure out the how. Just clarify why we're doing it and what you want.
Great, I appreciate that. Mr. Zwick, in your testimony, you talked about the need for non-prescriptive regulation that allows for customized solutions. Actually, you've all said that to a certain extent. You also described how the difficulty operating in different states with different regulations. About almost 10 years ago, I helped put together the National Cybersecurity Center in Colorado Springs, which specifically tries to discuss that and address that and look at that. Have you got any thoughts on how we can harmonize regulations, including between state and federal levels, without making them overly prescriptive?
Actually, I've talked to my friend Piyush at the end a few times about this, on how we can.
He's next. He's next.
Okay, so baselines that we can get out to the states to have them design their requirements around those, so we're all hitting the same target across all the states and at the federal level will help us a lot, because that is a concern we have. If we have to hit various targets, whether it's reporting requirements or security requirements, that puts a lot of extra load on us, determining what the actual request is, as well as implementing it and designing it.
Right, and I guess I would just throw out there, I think it's important to make sure we get the right people at the table as we establish what those levels are and make sure that we have buy-in up and down the food chain.
Absolutely, I very much agree, sir.
Great. Mr. Kumar, we're hearing about the need for timely communication, the need for trust between energy companies, their suppliers, DOE. Since the government regulates so much of the energy space, sometimes it appears industry may be reluctant to share its problems for fear of drawing the attention of regulators and the federal government to possible shortcomings. And I think the government has to be careful about how and if it shares threat information, which obviously is often sensitive, but reflects back on those private operators. Cybersecurity only works when everyone is talking. I don't think there's any substitute for that. How can we break down these barriers to effective communication, and how will the ETAC play a pivotal role?
Senator, thank you for that question, and I couldn't agree more with you. The cybersecurity community is built on trust. It's trusted relationships that allow information sharing. So in our role at the Department of Energy, we are the sector risk management agency for the energy sector, sir, where we leave the regulations to our colleagues at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We let them do the regulations. We focus on building that trusted partnership with colleagues at the utilities, but also cyber technology companies and manufacturers. And what we have found is they are willing to share with us. They want to tell us when they have a cyber incident. They want to make sure that it gets cascaded across the sector and that we have a collective defense posture. And that collective defense posture is where the e-tech is really focused on. That is the place where we want to bring together the community to look at threats. For such a long time, everyone's been looking at threats in their own individual companies. We look at it on the government side. How do we look at it together so that we can determine what is the true risk to our national security and then implement defensive measures and get information out to the entire sector?
Right, I got that. And I agree completely. I couldn't be more supportive of that. And you're currently working with independent contractors on a pilot for ETAC. Where are you on that feasibility?
Sir, yes. So we are conducting pilot activities, both here in the DC area, but also out in Denver, Colorado. Working with both the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, but also industry and other interagency colleagues. We have a critical mass there, so we're leveraging some of our pilot activities there. And the feasibility study that we're currently conducting will tell us where does this ETAC need to live, how large does it need to be, who needs to be in it, how do we make sure it can include all parts of the sector, and that feasibility study is due to be done this summer, sir.
Oh, great, that's terrific. Well, anyway, keep up the good work, all of you. I appreciate, it's an excellent panel, I say, to the leadership. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. Now we're anxiously awaiting to hear from Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both you and the ranking member for holding a hearing today, and appreciate the witnesses being here. I worked with Senator Rosen, who was here earlier, and we passed the CyberSense program, and essentially it was to help test products and technologies intended for use in bulk power system for any cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And so could you give me an update on your implementation of the CyberSense Act and both in terms of what you're doing and if you're finding that it's helpful and effective?
Senator, thank you for that question, and thank you for the support of the work the department has been doing on cyber testing through the Energy CyberSense Act. That act allows us to bring the community together. When I say the community, it's not just DOE and the labs, it is the utilities who are installing the equipment, it's the manufacturers who are building the equipment, and then we're also thinking about standards organizations to build in security into some of the standards that are used to design the grid of the future. So where we are right now is we have 4 global manufacturers who are part of the program. The first one is Schneider, Schweitzer, and Hitachi Energy, and then a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, in fact, we signed on GE Gas Power to partner with us. These are all willing partners to ensure that security is built in through testing, and to that end, we've already had a number of vulnerabilities tested or found through the testing program, and we've disclosed those vulnerabilities, certainly to the manufacturers so they can patch their systems and get the fixes out, but we also publicly disclose them so the community can actually benefit from this testing.
Right. I mean, the whole idea, of course, is to find these things, but then to inform others so that they can avoid, some of the cyber problems that you do find. So I think that's a very important part of it. Talk about some of the other steps you're taking, and particularly in regard to, we're so integrated in so many ways. If you have a cyber issue in one place, how do you prevent conflagration, having that spread through the system? Because things move so rapidly, the technology is changing so rapidly. How do you create firewalls or breaks in the system so that it just doesn't flash through the system in a way where, you not only have bigger problems, but it's really hard to track it down and root it out?
Absolutely, Senator. So this is where we need to be thinking about, certainly we talk a lot about security by design, but in some way, in the energy sector, we have to think about resilience by design. We have to think, how can we limit a potential impact of a cyber attack? How do we limit it from actually causing a larger disruption? We think back on the SolarWinds attack. One manufacturer that was exploited, or one software supplier was exploited, and it caused global impacts to companies using SolarWinds. We need to be thinking about how this is a key target for some cyber actors, and how do we ensure that we can not only protect those systems, but also ensure that it doesn't cause a cascading impact. This is where some of our research and development comes into play, where we can limit some of these cyber attacks and actually be able to contain them before they cause some of these impacts. So that is a key focus for us in our R&D program in CSER.
Yeah, that's the term that you said it much better, the cascading impacts. That's exactly what, it seems to me you really do have to be very aggressive in that regard so that you don't have something, it's one thing to have an isolated, and that attack or problem, that's bad enough, but the cascading effect obviously could get out of control in a hurry. Seems to me that's got to be a real area of right now, how are you doing? How are we doing? I mean, in terms of some of our adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, so on and so forth, how are we doing on staying on top of this cyber issue? I mean, do we really know what's going on? Do you really feel confident that we know what the risks are out there and we're getting to them? You don't bat 1,000, but that we're on top of this.
So, sir, this is an evolving risk landscape, and particularly in the cyber domain, it's a rapidly evolving cyber risk landscape. And so we absolutely have to stay on top of this. We are certainly doing that through some of the R&D that we're doing with the national laboratories. They're leading the charge on some of this. Our private sector partners are also innovating quickly. Now, we do still have some gaps, and this is where the Energy Threat Analysis Center pilot is going to help us. We are all seeing our own cyber threats in our own spaces, but we're not connecting the dots. We're not seeing, if this is happening out west, is it also happening out east? How do we connect those dots with what we learn from private sector networks and cyber technology companies with the intelligence community? That's where we need to go in the future if we're truly going to get on top of this threat.
Last question real quick. Are you able to get the people that you need, the sharp people with the kind of training you need to really get after this?
Senator, I really appreciate that question. When I started in CSER, we had a whopping 20 federal employees for the entire cybersecurity, energy security mission of all hazards. Since then, we've doubled our team, and then thanks to Congress and passing the budget in December, we are now able to even double that size. And our focus is to hire cyber talent, engineering talent, and we're implementing cyber retention incentives to attract that talent to the government so that we can actually execute these important programs.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Rono.
What, no adjective for me? I feel
You're
hurt.
just solid. That's all I can say is you're solid, Senator.
Okay, I'll take that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Mr. Kumar,
You're early.
we have heard from Mr. Swick, of AEP, representing one of the largest electric utilities in the country. In past hearings under Chair Murkowski, we heard from similar or smaller utilities that struggle to find the resources to secure their systems from cyber attacks. As part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, this committee established a $250 million grant and technical assistance program. It's called the Rural and Municipal Utility Advances Cybersecurity Growth and Technical Assistance Program. It's a mouthful. To help improve the cyber capabilities of smaller utilities and rural electric cooperatives, such as the Kauai Island Utility Cooperative in Hawaii. Can you update us on DOE's implementation of this program?
Senator, thank you for that question, and this is a really important area, is we need to really be focused on some of those under-resourced communities. We need to be thinking about the municipal utilities, the rural cooperatives. There are over 2,700 of them across the United States, so we need to prioritize their efforts.
Yes, that's why we have this program.
I
How's
think
it going?
Where we are right now with the program is, what we've been spending is we've conducted listening sessions with the companies themselves. So we had listening sessions with over 250 municipal rural cooperative utilities with cyber technology companies to really understand where do we need to focus those resources so we can have an impact. And so we are in the process, after those listening sessions that we convened with all of these different stakeholders, we're now in the process of starting to execute some of that funding and get it out the door to the communities.
So can you give me an example of what some of these smaller utilities and rural entities need in the area of cyber protection?
So one of the things that we found through some of the listening sessions is In some cases, it might just be cyber hygiene. In other cases, they may not have the resources to hire cyber talent, and so they might need to bring in third parties who can come in and execute some of the cybersecurity measures for them. And so we need to meet them where they are to ensure that we can actually have a sustainable program, because we want to ensure that it's not going to be a thing where they have funding for a couple of years and then they don't have funding after that. It has to be sustainable.
Yes.
So that's been our focus, is to make sure it's a sustainable program beyond the life of the funding that we have.
So in these listening sessions that you had, was Kauai Utility one of those entities that you heard from?
Senator, I'm not sure
I can
right now,
check
but
with
I'm
them,
happy to come
but
back with
you're
you.
available to help them, right? Because
Absolutely, ma'am.
they're the only utility co-op in Hawaii. We're going to need a highly trained, again, for you, Mr. Kumar, a trained workforce to help defend the critical infrastructure against these kinds of attacks. And we have CSER. What is CSER doing to improve post-secondary educational cybersecurity training curricula?
Senator, workforce is a key element. As I mentioned earlier, we have 700,000 unfilled jobs. And then when you actually take a look at what those jobs that know energy systems, that's an even smaller pool. So to that end, we are focused in 3 areas. One is the future workforce, and that's focused on the post-secondary workforce. So we have a competition where we bring together colleges, universities, technical colleges all together to defend energy systems in a mock cyber scenario. And the idea is we also we bring in private sector so that they can look at jobs in the private sector, jobs at the national laboratories, and of course, jobs with us in CSER. We're training them to understand the cyber threats and make it real, where it's not just cyber is a thing that happens in an IT environment, it actually has operational impact to the availability of electricity, oil, and natural gas. And so we're training them through the competition.
So that sounds good. Has your office considered supporting students with fellowship opportunities, for example, in government or in the government or energy sector, so that they can get some hands-on experience and create a commitment and interest in working with within the government sector?
Senator, as music to my ears, we are actually actively looking at fellowships to bring in fellows into the Department of Energy to help us accomplish our mission.
You should, please let us know, because I'm a big supporter of internships and fellowship programs to really give people the experience within government and the kinds of jobs, et cetera, and what they can do as part of our effort. We're all in this together, so to build that esprit de corps, I think that's a good thing. Okay, I would like to ask one of the other, I am out of time.
Go ahead.
For Mr. Swick, investing in modern electrical grid will play a key role in ensuring reliable power, higher levels of renewable power, and lower energy bills. And you may know that Hawaii pays the highest electric bills. I think we still pay the highest in the country. So in addition, microgrids with local energy and energy storage systems offer the potential to ensure hospitals, fire stations, and military installations can quickly recover from natural disasters or cyber attacks on the larger grid. What should regulators, owners, and operators of assets in the power sector do to take advantage of the benefits and reduce the risks that come as local power systems incorporate larger shares of distributed renewable power sources and energy storage?
So a big piece of that is making sure we manage the risk that those could introduce. As we have all the distributed resources to get connected, we need to make sure the right guidelines exist for them so they don't introduce risk while they're managing the risk. Their whole intent is to help manage that risk, but we need to make sure we're not introducing more as it's being implemented. So controlling those, as well as partnering with the local areas and making sure we figure out what they need. And AEP's doing a lot in those areas to help create microgrids and other distributed areas where we can work with partners to enable that to be provided.
So do you think that the utilities are doing a good job to make sure that they're not introducing risk into their systems?
I think the utilities are doing a good job helping manage that and ensure it. Some of the distributed providers that may not have the same level of capabilities or focus, and they may not be looking at security first to market, those are some areas where I think we need to continue to focus and help manage that risk, because it's things that I may not be able to control because I can only reach so far into it, right? So we need them to step up and bring secure stuff to connect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator King.
I'm only sorry we didn't have this hearing last week, Mr. Chairman. We could have started it with Caesar, beware the Ides of March.
Oh, boy.
Sorry, I sometimes can't stop myself. Mr. Kumar, this rarely happens with me, but I want to associate myself with the questions of Senator Hawley. I think determining the Chinese origin content of crucial parts of the electric system, whether it's SCADA systems, transformers, wherever, is a hair-on-fire urgent matter. That next time you're here, we need a much sharper answer to that. Because that's an enormous opportunity for malicious activity. The other point I wanted to make, Senator Manchin, is none of these witnesses really, but in New England anyway, the pipeline system is really part of the grid. Over 60% of our electricity in New England comes from natural gas. All of the natural gas comes through pipelines. So it bothers me that we've got TSA over here and FERC over here, and I'm not sure there's a consistent regulatory
We're trying to fix that, sir.
structure. I think we have to fix that because, you know, we can put all of our efforts into grid security, as you know, and then if the pipeline goes down, the power's off. Mr. Swick, do you do red teaming and pen testing of your system?
Yes, sir. We do in the IT space, and we do with substations and others to make sure we understand how they connect, where the risks are. We have an internal team, and we also have mandatory external testing that also occurs.
Hackers for hire.
Hackers for hire, white hat hackers, whatever we want to call them. We have our internal team and external.
Is that typical throughout the industry? Because I think that's really the most effective thing, because if you ask any CIO, are we safe? The answer is, of course. Nobody knows that until they're tested.
Right, and it has to be a quality attacker. So if they don't find something, then go find another person, because there's always something to find. But I do think all the peers I talk to leverage similar practices to make sure we're finding what the actual risks are, and then can quickly address them.
Mr. Lee, you think pen testing is an important part of this process?
Excuse me. Senator, it's absolutely important, but I think it's also really important for the utilities and others to know what they're trying to accomplish out of it, which goes back to those requirements I mentioned that the government can help with about what are we actually trying to solve for. Having a pen tester come in just to show that something is exploitable may not be that valuable. Having a red team or someone else emulating one of the threats that we actually expect to face, and then seeing how the systems and our people do in the face of that is a wonderful endeavor.
But it may be important just to wake up the executive suite.
When we get called in for pen tests, that's almost always what it is, hey, we know there's a problem, but can you prove it for us to get the resourcing required?
Do you believe that there are already sleeper cells in our grid? They're already been penetrated by the Russians, perhaps by the Chinese, that are waiting for exploitation?
I think it is a very reasonable assumption, but the bigger problem is we don't know. And actually goes to your Chinese component discussion as well that Mr. Kumar was talking about, which is if you look at the guidance and regulation that's come out from the government to the asset owners, about 95% of it is preventative. Patch, passwords, access management, and so forth. That leaves very little for visibility, detection, response, recovery.
That's what's concerning me. We may have already lost this battle in some sense.
If they're not already, I mean, they've tried multiple times, but not to be too flippant, but if they're not already in key parts of it, I don't think they're doing the job very well.
Mr. Kumar, your thoughts about the existence of, I call them sleeper cells, but you understand what I mean.
So, Senator, as Mr. Lee was mentioning, we need to invest in detection of adversaries. We need to be able to see them. So how do we know that they're already there? And we may not know. And how do we get that awareness? So one of the big focus areas for us over the last year has been we need to deploy sensor technologies. This was a White House-led initiative to say we need more visibility in our energy sector networks, and we need to get sensors to do that. And if we see something that is anomalous in those in those networks, we need to be able to connect those dots and say, well, why did that malfunction happen versus was it just a technical failure or was it something more malicious? We don't know that, and we need to get that visibility, sir.
Well, I want to ask another question about a gap in our defense is, are you allowed, is the NSA allowed to work with you on determining what's going on in these, in the grid systems?
Senator, we have a fantastic relationship with our colleagues at the NSA. Through DOE, as a member of the intelligence community, has a robust Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, and we have a robust relationship through them with the entire intelligence community, including the NSA.
Well, that's important because we have amazing capabilities throughout the government. The question is whether you can access them or whether TSA can access them or FERC. That's what worries me, is that we can have a falling between the cracks phenomenon.
Senator, we are actively working with them. They're a great partner.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thanks for appearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to talk about the vulnerabilities on their nation's national gas pipelines, and maybe someday too, hydrogen pipelines. But the Colonial Pipeline attack that occurred last spring was definitely a wake-up call. And after Colonial Pipeline and the Texas Big Freeze event, it became clear that we need to do more to ensure reliability of the bulk power system without, and you have to do both. You have to have the whole system. So I'd like to get the witnesses' views on the bulk electricity system and energy pipeline system. I want to work with the chairman, Senator Manchin, and others, Senator Barrasso, and members of the committee. In the last, when Chair Chatterjee at FERC was there, we needed reliability and cybersecurity standards for pipeline. With the help of NERC and FERC, we've improved that, but I believe that we need standards that work well and will be around for a long time. So I want to work with the committee and the chairman and ranking member to introduce legislation that will give FERC this very clear role. I think that's what needs to be done in protecting our pipeline from cybersecurity attacks. So I'd like to know what the witnesses think about that. And Mr. Swick, I also believe that fiber is one of the best anecdotes to helping us here. And I've been working with Senator Capito and others on the cost share of building out fiber capacity for our nation's grid. Legislation that's been supported by EEI and the National Rural Co-op Association, Washington Utilities. But I know that AEP has been a strong leader in National Grid Fiber, and wanted to see if you could add in with your comments why that makes sense as it relates to helping build a better secure grid. So maybe we'll start with you and then go down.
Yes, ma'am. We'll start with the fiber question as the last one. AEP has invested significantly in fiber. So alternate private fiber or private communications, I think there is absolute value in it. AEP has been investing for years and has one of the largest private fiber networks. So we see the value in it for us as well as potentially for others. So I think that is should be continued to focus on, whether it's fiber or different wireless methods. I think there's value in that.
Well, how can fiber help us on the security side?
So in our case, we have a private fiber network that we can penetration test. We can ensure it is a closed loop system, and we know what is on that network and who can touch that network, and we manage that ourselves. So there is benefits to having visibility and control across from end to end.
So a closed loop network compared to where we are today, why, just compare what you think the threat level is.
So I know that there's no Chinese-made network equipment in our fiber network. So things like that, where I can see what is in there, I know what technologies are implemented, I know how it's designed and how it's implemented. Versus you get to the public internet, there's things on the big carriers that I don't have the visibility into. A lot of them are extremely good at what they do, but I don't have that visibility or able to test it.
The closed loop network increases greatly our cybersecurity capacity as a nation.
I believe it does, and AEP does with our investment that continues.
Thank you. And to the FERC role in pipelines?
So I think electric industry has been regulated, has cyber regulations for well over a decade. Gas pipeline, who we significantly rely on, as Senator King referenced for New England and other areas, we need that gas pipeline to be just as reliable as the electric grid. So now we've got regulations and a lot of pressure on the gas pipelines, but it should be standardized. And if FERC can lead that, then I think they'll line up well, and we can have the same progress for both industries. And we do work closely together with the gas pipeline industry, but similar regulators, there would be benefit, I believe.
Well, I have legislation to do just that, but Mr. Lee and Mr. Kumar, do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, and very quickly, Senator, I would say that FERC is a very logical choice. I don't really particularly care which one takes it, so long as it's one. When TSA rolled out the regulations, no offense to them, but it was massively rushed, like a 24-hour heads up. No understanding why we were doing it, what we were supposed to accomplish, only how to operate our systems. If you would have followed the original TSSD2 guidance to a T, you would have taken down pipelines in this country. TSSD2C is a lot better, and they've worked very hard. So who takes it? Don't really care. Somebody needs to, and actually standardize instead of having competing requirements. On the discussion from closed-loop fiber, absolutely where it's feasible, but I think the broader point to make is there's lots of different options, and people in the electric system know how to have a secure electric system, but we've got payment discussions and policy discussions around how to actually do that, and we are operating the electric system today in this country in a way it was never designed, in a way that's rapidly changing energy portfolio and so forth, that's just adding immense complexity and then cyber. And so we have to address it completely, otherwise we'll take our own system down.
Senator, on your question regarding pipeline cybersecurity, I couldn't agree more in terms of the interdependency between electricity and natural gas. We need to ensure that the pipelines, and I would even extend it to say the broader oil and natural gas sector, we need to really up our cybersecurity defenses across the country. And so in this case, TSA certainly has that authority currently to do that, and I was glad to see the requirements that were put out for the pipelines. And we're happy to work with the committee on moving forward on how we would like to do that going forward.
Well, thanks so very much. I have a couple of additional questions, and then I don't know if Senator King, if you do as well. Okay, first, Mr. Lee. The Air Force's former chief software officer said last year that the United States would not stand, quote, a fighting chance if China and Russia combine their cyber warfare capabilities against the United States. Do you believe that cooperation between these two regimes could put our critical energy infrastructure in even further damage?
Thank you, Senator. As a prior Air Force officer and NSA veteran, I would never count America out. That being said, yes, it poses a real risk. China and Russia are explicitly two that have continued to try and sometimes have been successful in compromising our energy system. Working together, they would absolutely pose significant risk. And the predominance of cybersecurity is done in the private sector, not by the government for private sector entities. And we absolutely need to make sure the resources and policies are aligned to go against that kind of threat.
Anyone else on the panel want to comment on that?
Senator Barrasso, we need to be thinking about both of those countries. They're highly capable adversaries, and we need to make sure that we are defending our networks with the threat that is looming from Russia and China.
Anything additional, Mr. Swig? Okay.
Nothing to add. Good comments.
So Senator Manchin had to go to another committee hearing. He wanted to make a statement and then a question. He said, pipeline cybersecurity is overseen by the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, Surface Operations Division, while FERC and NERC oversee electric grid cybersecurity. After the cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline in 2021, the TSA issued some mandatory pipeline cybersecurity standards for the first time. And so the question is, Mr. Kumar, what are our Department of Energy's thoughts on TSA's new pipeline standards, and how does the Department of Energy coordinate with TSA to promote energy cybersecurity?
Senator, thank you for that question. So we at the department actually co-chair what is called the Oil and Natural Gas Subsector Coordinating Council. That is the meeting where we bring together oil and natural gas companies from across the country with government agencies, including DOE and DHS as the co-chairs. TSA, PHMSA, and other agencies participate in that. And the goal of that focused area of that is security and resilience. And so we provide classified threat briefings to these companies. Now, in terms of your specific question regarding the security directives, the current version of the security directives are a much better representation of things that the pipeline companies should be doing. And so we're glad to partner with TSA in terms of ensuring that actually happens.
Right. And then finally, Mr. Lee, as someone who provides cybersecurity services for pipeline companies, what are your views on the TSA's program?
Yeah, as Mr. Kumar stated, the current version is directionally accurate. The previous version, again, was something that wouldn't have actually increased security very much at all, but would have increased the risk of the pipelines significantly. I would just simply state that as we look at these standards going forward, it is never a bad idea to talk to the regulated about what we are going to do before you introduce regulation.
Well, thank you all. Senator King, you would admit this was a terrific panel. They really knew their stuff. There was great bipartisan agreement and the needing to do more. We appreciate it. Yeah, that's something, isn't it? I know. So thank you again to the witnesses. Members will have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record, and I expect, Mr. Kumar, you'll be getting some from Senator Hawley. The committee stands adjourned.